Hello all. So after so much of discussion about this topic, I spent some time on it and thought to kind of start a series about if you have to do a report development in AL programming language, then how you do it. This is the first video in this series, and there will be more coming up. In this particular video, on the day one video, we'll talk about the introduction of different report components that you should know before you start getting into Visual Studio Code and start writing your first report. Going forward, we'll talk about simple reports. We'll understand how you design the data set, how you build the layout, what are the common questions that I've heard about it. In the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to add them into comment section of this video, and I'll try to answer these questions as we go ahead in the series. So let's begin with that. Okay. So let's understand what are the different components in a report. And the first major component of a report is a data set. Now, data set is a flat file which is generated uh, based on the data items and other components that you use in the report. Now, based on the data set of the report, the next mandatory component or next important component of the report that comes into picture is the report layout, which is an optional parameter because a report can be printing an output or maybe just processing some task which doesn't require a printable output. So that classifies reports into two different type of report. One is a printable report and another one is a processing only report which executes some processes. So now let's understand how the data set is built because data set acts as a source to the layout part or the design part of the report. So to build a data set, there are different properties that you need to specify in your report. Each report have different triggers which helps to build this data set, and then you can have your own functions or methods in your report which will also then help to build your data set file. Now with all these different components, a data set is built and the data set is fed to the layout to generate a printable output. But then there is one another important component which is the request page, which allows user to filter out or to limit what kind of data will be generated when the report executes. And we'll understand about all these parts as we go through on this video. So let's talk about report descriptions. As a developer, what you need while you're building a report, you just need to have a report number in your license range, and then you also need a report name, a unique report name. And then you just simply add data items, you define your properties, you define your triggers, and then you design your layout. Sounds simple, but there are so many components, and I'll take an image from Microsoft Gallery. This is from Microsoft Learn portal, if you have been there, which gives you the all the components in the report. So let's kind of go through them. So a report description is a collection of all the items which are required for a report, which includes the report properties, the triggers on the report, and as I said, a report is a collection of data item. So then data item also have their own properties, triggers, and columns, and then each column has its own properties. Then there's something called as tables who have their own properties. And then as we discussed in the last slide, there's a request page, which also have its own properties, triggers, and control. And then there is this RDLC data, which is the layout part or the visual part of the report. So let's go through about each of these items in detail, and then we'll be ready for our next part. So what are report properties and triggers? So a report can have different properties which defines what a report can do. Is it a printable report? Is it a processing only report? What kind of layout will be using? And what is the number of the report? What is the name of the report? Caption of the report, and things like that. Other than the report properties, as I said, that there are data items. So data item also have their own properties, which means uh, which table it is from. Do I want to limit some records based on some fixed filters that I want to apply? In the same way, there can be column properties like will this column get the caption from the table source and things like that. Then there are label properties, which defines um, what is the fixed text on it and what values will be used when this label will be translated to a text value. And then, as we said, there's a request page. Request page have its own properties also. Now let's understand about the different triggers that are available in the report. Each report will have an init, which will be called when the report is initialized, a pre-report, which will run before the report start execution, and then a post report, which actually gets called at the end of the report. Then, as a report is a collection of multiple data items, each data item have these three different triggers, which is the pre-data item, which is called before that data item actually start executing, and then after get record, on after get record, which is called when every record of that particular data item is fetched, and the post data item, which is called at the end of that data item. And then last but not least, we have request page triggers, which are equivalent to a page trigger, more or less, because it's a kind of a page which allows user to filter records. So you'll find all the triggers which are available in a page. But then page can have controls, like you can have different fields where user can limit or filter the records. So each control also have different triggers available. You don't have to remember any of these. When we start working on these report, we'll understand what these different properties and triggers are. So don't get confused at this point. Once we go ahead, we'll try to cover most of these as we go through our in the series of report development. So let's move ahead and see what's left in the report description. The next one and the major one is what are data items and what are columns. What is a data item in a report and what type of columns we can define in a report. So to make it very simple, a data item is a table in Business Center. Any table, either it's a base Microsoft table, a table from an ISV or an app that you're using, or a table that you have built. So it can be any kind of table that's available in Business Central, which you can use as a data item. A report can have 0 to unlimited number of data items that you can have, and where n is unlimited. Now, when I say 0, that means it's a processing only report, which is just trying to calculate some processes that need to execute and doesn't print the output. Now, a data item, if you're using multiple data item and you need to link those data item, and sorry for the typo here, you need to place them hierarchically based on the indentation property in the report. And we'll see what that means when we start doing the development of reports. When two data items of a report are indented, then the child item is repeated for each parent item. That's how indentation work in the report. The next one is a column. When the data item is equivalent to a table, the very simple logic to understand is a column that it can surely be a field from that table. And a data item is a collection of columns. So inside a data item, there can be one or more columns that you need, or maybe zero columns if you don't need anything over there. But a data item, as I said, can not just only be the table field. You can also have a variable defined in your report, which you can use as a data item if required. You can also use an expression, which means if you're building a report on, let's say, on the customer table, and you, let's say, want to sum up two values of two columns in the customer table, then you can write a plus sign, or if you have to multiply something. So that sort of expression can also be part of a data item. And then for sure, there are captions that you can add in the data item. Now let's understand the next part in our report description, which is labels. Labels have been there from NEV word, and if I'm not wrong, they were introduced in NEV 2013. But I know for a fact that there are so many developers who don't use labels. So I want to spend some time into labels and understanding of why you should be using labels. So you can use labels to add a text, to add a text field to the parameters. Like you can use it to have a fixed text also, or use it for captions. Now, labels also are, you can also add labels into data item if required. It's not mandatory, but if required, you can add it on data items. So the scenario where you'll use it for the fixed text are like if you want to have a fixed report name, then you can use labels, and the description of that label is a report name, which then can be used in the design. Or if you want to have a caption generated, then you can also use labels, which then can be used in the data item of the report. Now, what's the benefit of using labels? Now, if you write something fixed text in your layout or in your designer, then that loses the multi-language capabilities or multilingual capabilities when it's used in multiple regions or countries. Now, when you add a text with a label, it actually gets added into the translation file, which allows it to support multilingual capabilities if required. The other thing which I like, why I like labels so much, is it helps you to improve the performance of report. Because if you had to add some fixed text in your report and you use labels, then you don't have to add them to the data item if you want them in your layout, in your design part. They will be automatically available as parameter in your designer layout, and which then in turn reduces the size of your data set. And we need to keep a very close eye into the size of our data set, because the, the bigger the data set is, the performance of that report execution will be slower. There are impacts of the design for sure in the performance, but the data set plays a very important role in your report performance. So we need to try to keep our report data set as small as we can. And I'll show you how it look like, how you can see that in our coming videos in this series, and what best practices you should follow to keep it small as much as you can. Now going forward, let's talk about the request page of the report, which is second last component in the report description. Now, as I said, the report request page allows user to limit the data that will be generated when the report executes. So it allows developer to have a page open before the report execution actually starts to collect some kind of requests from users, so that it can limit certain records before it gets printed. For example, if you have a report on a customer table and you want to limit the data that's generated on that report based on uh, customer number, or based on currency code that they are using. All those options can be added into the request page, and you can also add your custom fields or custom filters if you want on your request page, which will then can be used to reduce the size of your data set and will then improve the performance of the report. As I said earlier, request page are also optional. You don't have to define one if you don't need one. But if you need one, then you should define it, because that helps user to kind of reduce the data that will be used for generating the report output for you. Now, last but not least is the report layout part. Now, if you're working on Dynamics Nav or Business Central for a while, you'll understand that there are two options to add a layout. The one very common one and the powerful one is client definition, report definition layout, which is RDLC layout. Now, to work with RDLC layout, you'll require either a Visual Studio Report Designer or a SQL Server Reporting Service report builder. Now, I'm not sure about the pricing of the first one. Maybe it's free now, but most of the developers are using the SQL Report Builder. That's a free tool available from Microsoft, and it provides more or less every capabilities which is available on Visual Studio Report Designer. The second option that we have for report layout development is Microsoft Word layouts, which will require Microsoft Word to do the XML mapping into your Microsoft Word, which will generate your layout. So these are the two options in the layout. So before we meet next time, I want you to do certain things. One, have a Business Central environment ready, either on premises or if you have a sandbox, cloud sandbox, or if not, then you should have a Docker environment. Have that ready before we meet next time. And if you don't have the SQL Server Reporting Services report builder, then you can always go into the product DVD. And how should I zoom this in? Let me make it large icon. Okay. Or let's say extra large icon. In the product DVD, there is a folder called prerequisite component. Inside the prerequisite component, inside Microsoft SQL Server, you get something called as report builder. Now this installs your report builder, which is required for the report design or layout development. If you don't have a product DVD because you are on Sandbox or you are working on Dockers, you can always go into the MSDN website of the version that you're using. This is for April 19, but you can also see for the higher versions if you need. Okay, 2021 release wave 2, which is BC19, and that's what I'll be using. And you can search for report builder, and you see that this is the report builder version that is supported for creating and editing RDLC report or RDL reports. So you can download that, or if you want Visual Studio, if you have Visual Studio, you need to make sure that the Visual Studio 2017 in this case have the RDLC report designer for Visual Studio installed. So you can just search for report builder for SQL 2019, and when you search for it, you'll end up on a page like this, and you'll see that there is a report builder MSI which you can download and then install report builder in your system before we meet next time. Now, with that, that's all for today. What I'll try to do is I'll I'll try to record the next video as soon as possible, and do let me know your questions. The last time when I did this series, I got questions pretty late, and it's hard to kind of follow up on those questions later. So I'd recommend follow the series. If you like the content, do share it, because your friends and colleagues will get to it maybe later because they haven't subscribed to the channel. But do share it so that others can also understand and learn with us together while we are watching and recording these sessions. And if you want to meet you know us as a group where we do meet every week in Business Central or BC open discussions every week, so you can join here. Thank you, and see you next time with the second video in this series. Have a nice day.